Hello and welcome to the Conscious Consulting Podcast, where we will introduce you to the Conscious Consulting philosophy. Together with our senior advisors from all around the world, we blend the deep knowing of wisdom traditions, technology, modern science and business, and show you how to transform this wisdom into impact in your daily life as a consultant, leader or entrepreneur. Welcome to the CCG community. Robert Thomas moved to San Francisco in his 20s, where he founded multiple successful businesses. But after many years on the fast track, Robert found himself on a cliff, and Robert became a Zen monk and lived more than 21 years as an ordained Zen Buddhist priest. He has almost 30 years of meditation practice and teaches now for over 18 years mindfulness meditation in secular settings and retreats. Robert is also a senior advisor at the Conscious Consulting Group and brings traditional wisdom principles and practices to business leaders all around the world. And in this special podcast episode, Robert gives us an introduction to Buddhism. He shares the life story of Buddha and how Buddhism developed and gives an insight to fundamental key concepts and practices of Buddhism. So, relax, sit back and enjoy this special teaching on the Conscious Consulting Podcast.
I'd like to start by thanking Julia and Christian for bringing us all together. I also would like to make it clear to you that I'm not a Buddhist scholar. That instead it's more like me picking out some of the key concepts, principles, practices that I have found helpful to me as a practitioner. As a practitioner in this modern world, living and functioning now in this modern world, no longer even in the monastery. Just take what feels beneficial, and the rest just let flow by. So let's jump in with the basics. So some people have experience with Buddhist practice, and some people don't have experience with Buddhist practice. So I'll just start with very simple description that says that the Buddha was an actual person who lived nearly 2,600 years ago, born in what is now southern Nepal, growing up as a prince, being groomed to be successor to his king, the father. But at the age of 28, he left his palace and this life that was just pretty much prescribed, laid out for him, and he began a spiritual journey where he sought to do nothing less than understand the most fundamental truths about what it is to be a human being. Why and how we suffer, and what are the ways and conditions for our deep and lasting peace and contentment and happiness and fulfillment in life. He wandered around studying with various teachers at the time for 6 years, and then famously sitting under the Bodhi tree, he experienced a profound insight into the nature of reality. Something we now today call his enlightenment. And based on this experience and the insights gained from it, he spent the next 40 years wandering throughout India, teaching and guiding his disciples and training other teachers, and kind of disseminating and developing his thoughts about how to practice. Laying the basic groundwork over the course of that 40 years for what would eventually become one of the world's major religions. A religion that spread out across from India, across Asia, and now globally, hundreds of years later. So I would like to share my understanding of some basic principles and practices by presenting key concepts that can be grouped together at three distinct but related levels. The first level is the level of worldview. It's the level of world system making. It's the level of what I like to call framework making in a kind of a secular interpretation. How do we create a framework for us to understand our world and ourself in that world? So I'll talk about that at kind of a highest level. And then we'll move to a second level that's at the level of maybe organizing. It's a structural level. It's the level of what I like to call pattern making. And then the third level is at the level of direct action, practice, engagement, service, individual intention, impact. So that's the third level. So I'm going to talk about practice, some key aspects, not completely everything, but some key aspects that I find particularly interesting about at each of those levels. So at the worldview level, or as I like to say, at the framework making level, what the Buddha experienced, what the Buddha saw, what the Buddha understood or realized in that time that we call as enlightenment under the tree is our key reference point. What he realized and then spent the rest of his life teaching about is that the fundamental nature of reality and everything within our experience of ourselves and our world functions or works or exists according to two principles. The first one is that everything is constantly moving and changing. There is nothing that's staying in one place, and nothing that's fixed and not constantly moving and changing all the time. And this includes everything from the smallest element in an atom to the largest mountains, to the stars as far and galaxies as far away as we can imagine. So everything is moving and changing constantly. The other principle is that everything is in relationship with everything else. Everything is interconnected and interdependent. And everything is in this web of life that we use the kind of, in Buddhism, we use a technical term, that and every element, every single, no matter how small or how big, in this web of life, this boundless, boundaryless web of life, is dependently co-arising, is coming into being for and with and from everything else. Now, some of these relationships are very close and very direct and observable, and some are very far away. But everything is part of this web of life. So recently I've started to see and understand this as as almost functioning on two axes. You know, one is the axis of time, and so everything changes, or everything is constantly changing, everything is constantly moving, is an aspect of time. And the other axis or aspect there is space. Everything is in relationship with everything else. Everything is in a dependent relationship with everything else. And this is important for us to understand, and to some extent for each one of us as we develop as practitioners to really kind of get inside of our bodies, to embody this kind of understanding and be able to express it. This is important because it directly connects with how we suffer and how we find happiness and fulfillment, peace and contentment in our lives. So the Buddha taught that we suffer in three different ways. We suffer at one very basic level. There's not an option, because we have bodies and we have lives and we have feelings and emotions and nervous systems. So we are going to do things like stub our toes. Do you say that in German? You stub your toe? You know, we're going to get sick. We're going to get old. We're going to die. We're going to have people we love die. So there's some level of grieving or pain or difficulty that's just inherent, just is connected to the fact that we're alive and we're feeling human beings. And that's not so optional at this very basic level. Then there's another level that's actually quite optional. And this is directly related to these two axes. We suffer because things on some high level, we suffer because things don't stay the same, because things are changing, because things aren't fixed, because I don't know how things are going to happen, because life is uncertain. And we also suffer because we're in relationship with everything else. We suffer because we're not free to do whatever we want, and we're dependent on being able to survive as human beings with the things around us. So this creates suffering, and our usual human strategies to relieve this suffering is to try to control them, right? To try to make things as certain as possible, or as predictable as possible, or to try to, in terms of relationships, to get more of what I like and less of what I don't like, and success or happiness on that level is kind of having the freedom. Whether it's financial or emotional or physical, to be able to avoid things, or get more of what we like, and just be around that all the time. So that's, on some level, that's defining in today's modern world what success is or what happiness is. But as the Buddha pointed out, that's not a deep and true and lasting happiness. That's a happiness that takes a lot of work and is not lasting. And it's just a surface level of happiness or contentment or peace. So understanding these two axes of things always changing and us functioning in this interdependent web of life is also important, because this insight is the basis for a key concept of Buddhist practice, which is called emptiness. And emptiness in this context means lacking or empty of any fixed, permanent, abiding, non-changing, independent, autonomous self. So it's lacking all of those things. And because something is lacking those things, it's empty. It's emptiness. So especially in Zen Buddhism, but this idea shows up in various forms of Buddhism. This is especially important to see that even though there are forms all around us, all of these forms are actually empty of any true, fixed, permanent, inherent existence. And we can only call it this, or we can only refer to it like this, or we can actually only understand it in a very provisional way. Conventionally, to work with, we call this a glass, so that we know that when somebody asks us for a glass, we know what to bring them. But in another context, maybe this is not a glass. Maybe it's a vase. In another culture, they wouldn't even know this as a glass. Maybe it's in another language. It would be whatever you call it, in Austria. It's not glass. So this form is emptiness. But the emptiness is also form. The fact that things are actually always changing and things are interdependent allows them to take form. So this is what leads me to the third important point, point to appreciate about this access of space and time, is that the Buddha saw that this was not some kind of special understanding that he had under the Bodhi tree. It's not some kind of understanding that came from his wealth or privilege, or it was a result of his practice, but he saw that it was not something that comes in the form of knowledge, but it actually was a revealing of that which was already there. An unveiling of that which was already, because it was his and the world's true nature, that which was already present all along, but he just didn't see it. And he saw that, just like he now saw it, that any human being, that all of us can see it. There's no difference between any human being, no matter how educated, how wealthy, how whatever. We could all have this kind of realization, or this awakening. We could all see this. Any person could realize this for themselves. So this is all at the level of framework making, understanding how we might have a shared or a new even view of our world. But just having this new framework or this new view of our world is actually not enough. The Buddha saw that it's not enough. And so that's why he spent the next 40 years of his life trying to help people understand, well, how do we kind of integrate this kind of understanding, this deep sense of the nature of reality. Once we've started to glimpse it or see it more fully, then how do we bring that into our lives as human beings for the purpose of benefiting others? So that's when we get to the next level of seeing how do we organize, how do we structure practice in ways that it can be shared and extended. So I don't imagine that the Buddha had like an executive team and he sat down and said, okay, we have this great idea, how are we going to scale it, guys? But I do think he gave a lot of thought into how to, so to speak, scale practice, how to extend it, how to share it, how to communicate it, and how to organize the practice, and so to create kind of safe containers for practice, to create practice that was authentic, or had a fidelity, or a deep enough kind of value that it could actually benefit people in a very, very deep way. So he gave a lot of thought and many teachings about how to work at the level of what I like to call pattern making. So this involves, at some level, in the way I want to organize it today, this kind of pattern making involves creating conditions in also three different ways. The first way is simply with the model and example of the Buddha. The model and example of an enlightened being, the model of an example of someone who has made the commitment to train their mind and master practice in a way that they can actually not only experience directly this nature of reality, this everything constantly changing and everything interdependent with each other, but that they can actually share that with others and benefit others through their practice, through their example, through their interactions, some of which may involve speech, but many just involve, just observable actions. So that's the first pattern making condition is this example of a committed practitioner who has mastered the practice at a certain level, that actually can at that level can be communicated to others, inspire others and encourage others, and encourage others to actually take up that path for themselves. So the second pattern creating condition is at the level of growth and development and learning. So we oftentimes call this level dharma, which means truth or teachings. So it to actually embody the values and the principles there that we were talking about in the first section, everything changing, everything connected. we need ways to actually express that and embody that ourselves. And a key way is to share it with others the same way I'm doing it here today. It's just like speaking about it, sharing ideas, developing new ways of expressing ideas and new forms that are relevant and compelling to that context. The other way is to actually have forms of practice where people actually have to engage, actively in experiential learning, put their body into certain shapes, pay attention in a particular way. For a period of time. Those kinds of things. And so the activity of Buddhism is very much an expression or an embodiment of the wisdom and compassion that comes out of that basic understanding of the true nature of reality. And the third pattern creating condition is a community of practitioners that help each other kind of continue on the path of practice and encourage each other to grow and develop. They provide highly contextual kind of support and encouragement, and these are what we might call Dharma friends, very particular kinds of friends who will encourage our practice, friends who will inspire our practice, mentors, guides, people who will ask us questions, people who will keep us accountable. There's a story that the Buddha was practicing, and he had an attendant for most of his life, and this fellow's name was Ananda. And suddenly it occurred to Ananda that actually this community practice is pretty important. Because sometimes we think, well, the Buddha, just realizing, Buddhahood must be most important. And then maybe, the teachings are also important. And then, okay, we have to live with this group of people, so let's figure it out somehow. But actually it was dawning on Ananda that well, actually there's a lot of practice going on in my relationships with these people I'm practicing with. So he goes to the Buddha and he says, something like, I'm paraphrasing, something like, well, this is the Sangha is pretty important, isn't it, Buddha? And Buddha says, Ananda, it's not only that the Sangha is pretty important, the Sangha is all of the practice life. The Sangha is everything. Because the Sangha is actually where the practice happens. It's not like we practice somewhere else and then we go into our lives. And then we go into our situation and we say, well, how do I practice here? But actually the practice is happening, the context for our practice and the requests for our practice, the request to practice comes out of the actual circumstances of our life, the challenges of our life. Those challenges related to the fact that, I can't think, things aren't how they used to be. And now I can't do this anything anymore by myself. Like I'm taking care of my 89-year-old father now. He's used to being totally on his own, totally independent, totally controlling everything, deciding what he wants to do, when he wants to do it. And now he's in a situation where he's totally dependent on people to do everything, including going to the bathroom or taking a shower. So he's having a great time kind of awakening to the fact and the joys, actually, of being dependent on others. So these are important to understand about practice. You know, these three, the model of the Buddha, the value of the teachings being shared, and the practices being shared among people, and then this sense of a community of support for us. It's that's what, in some ways, that's what allowed Buddhism to extend and flourish after the Buddha died. You know, these kinds of structures, this kind of pattern making, because and it allowed Buddhist practice to then move into different cultures and find its own way of being relevant in the same form, same basic form. It allowed Buddhism to find its way to be relevant in extremely different cultures, with extremely different value systems, extremely different cultures or histories, backgrounds. A really wonderful concept that I didn't really appreciate until I'd been practicing for some time is that when somebody comes into this kind of a shape where you have somebody representing the teacher, somebody, some way of sharing the teachings, a practice in place, and a community of people who are committing themselves, dedicating themselves to embodying and expressing those values and that practice and that understanding. We call that taking refuge. And I used to bristle at that kind of word. I used to think taking refuge, that sounds like kind of maybe like too much. But actually I've warmed up to it, especially that I'm no longer in that system, because it was only in that kind of pattern making system that I could actually transform my life. Because that change from that usual path of that I talked about earlier, trying to control things or trying to make things more predictable or trying to gain my freedom by being autonomous or being independent, is hard. It's hard to learn that. It's hard to change. So we need help. And we need those kind of patterns to guide us, because we're going to fall down and then need to stand up again. And we're going to fall down and we're going to fail over and over and over again. And that's why it's a practice, because we have to continue. So the next level and the last level I'm going to talk about is at the level of making a difference. Personal action, individual intention, engagement, service, my practice, my commitment, my aspiration. At that level, it's at the level of individual mindset or individual attitude. So the Buddha planted the seeds for and gave incredible number of teachings about how to practice and how to organize our practice as a practitioner. But oftentimes it was directed, and for the most part, it was directed to his to his group of monks. Occasionally, he would be talking in a more broad way to a group of lay practitioners, but for the most part, it was during that time he was teaching to monks who were disciples of his. It was in the hundreds of years after the Buddha's death that the teachings of the Buddhism of the Buddha started to kind of extend beyond the walls or the boundaries of a monastery and those more dedicated practitioners into the lives of everyday people. And as it extended into the lives of everyday people, a concept kind of came into being. They gained over a couple of hundred years, gained an incredible amount of power and influence, and guided basically the development of a whole other kind of style of practice of Buddhism we call the Mahayana, which Zen is a part of. And this way of practicing has developed a particular kind of a model, in addition to the model of the Buddha, which still was existent, but seemed to be a little bit distant, right? Seemed to be a little bit unattainable. Another model came into existence that we call the bodhisattva. Bodhi means enlightening, sattva means being. So an enlightening being, and this is the example or archetype of a practitioner who is dedicated and committed to being on a path of practice, but vows to forego any kind of like ultimate enlightenment in place of benefiting all beings. So the bodhisattva makes this shift in their life, that they are going to live their life in a profoundly beneficial way for all beings, including themselves, but all beings. So the bodhisattva, adopted the worldview that we were talking about, the framework making. They function, they train, they practice within the context of the pattern making, but they're also committing to benefit others in every single possible way they possibly can, never wavering from this deep intention. So there's somebody who's kind of like, this fork in the road that the Buddha identified between, the usual way that we could just keep on living based on our habits and almost like living in almost like a hardwired way. That we could actually take a different path, that there's a fork in the road, that there's another option for us. There's more possibilities out there for us as human beings than we're actually seeing on this other path. That there is like infinite amount of possibilities on this other path. So the bodhisattva commits to taking that path. And in that way, the bodhisattva is the kind of like the sacred carrier of the intention to practice and benefit and do good. In every context, in every moment of the life, of a person's life, or in every situation, no matter how difficult. So I'm quickly going to describe in Zen how we think about the basic methods that the bodhisattva actually engages with the world. Of course, I just said, in every way possible, but there's some way of categorizing these methods, and different schools of Buddhism will come up with different formations. There's like 6 paramitas, there's the eightfold path, or there's 10 paramitas, or there's, different configurations of what this life looks like. Just to give people some guidance, in Zen we have four of these methods, and these 4 are giving freely, kind speech, beneficial action, and cooperation. So giving freely is not taking. It's definitely not taking what is not given. But freely is a very important word there. It's actually giving without an expectation of return. And this may be giving material objects, it may be giving advice, teachings, it may be giving guidance, or it just may be giving attention, caring, love, listening. And to make this real for all of us, I'll invite you to think about somebody in your life who gave something to you without an expectation of anything in return. I think that most people can actually remember those people. I have a number of people who come to mind just immediately, that somehow I knew that this person was giving something to me and didn't need anything back from me. And it was profoundly impactful in my life. So giving freely. Kind speech could also be generally thought of as kindness. Because this notion of speech also includes, our thoughts too. Any kind of verbal expression starts with some kind of formation of concepts and stories and narratives, and so then gets eventually expressed as speech. So generally, kindness can include all the actions of the body, speech, and mind. And even as we think about kindness, it also connects to qualities or practices of empathy, compassion, equanimity. And then the third kind of method for the bodhisattvas, or you could say practice of the bodhisattvas, is beneficial action. Having an attitude or mindset that in each moment, no matter what the conditions are, no matter how difficult or how challenging, the bodhisattva is seeking out seeking the way to find what might be most beneficial. So this isn't actually leading this beneficial action is not actually a list of beneficial actions. It's actually more like a list of questions. Okay, what is going to be beneficial now? It's an intention. It's a willingness to go into each situation not knowing what is going to be beneficial. but actually having the intention to be of benefit, to be a positive force, to help. That's that practice. And there's so much more I could say about every single one of these, but I'm trying to get to the end of this. And the last one is cooperation. Means identifying ourselves as part of a larger being, as part of the larger body. Ultimately, in Zen we have this phrase that the entire universe is the true human body. It's the true human body. The entire universe. Where would the end be? So this cooperation is a question still also. How are we going to, what does my attitude need to be to work together with everything? Not just my little team here, and not just my city, not just everybody in my country, but actually all the mountains and the rivers and the trees and the elephants and the snakes and the birds and the clouds and the stars, all of those things. What is it to cooperate with everything? So I'd like to close with something that's maybe a little bit more personal. And then we can open it up to questions. Maybe you've made your own connections or have your own insights or would like to share something here, whatever we'd like to do after this. But I'd like to close by just saying that I don't think I would have made it as a practitioner. Certainly probably wouldn't have stuck with the difficulty of practice or the choice of dedicating my life to become a Buddhist practitioner if it hadn't worked on two different levels for me. At one level, it's extremely kind of like humble, small, intimate. It's a matter of like, how will I put this cup down on the surface? It's a matter of how will I meet this moment fully? How will I do the most basic? How will I plant this flower in a way that harmonizes with my deepest intention? How will I do the simplest thing? Nothing so complicated, How will I take care of this thought I have right now in the best possible way? So at one level, it's extremely kind of humble and simple. And at another level, it's completely radical and audacious. I mean, there's probably been no more audacious concept shared with the world than the notion of complete enlightenment. I still remember the day when I was walking along in college and a friend of mine said, "Oh, those people are very enlightened." And I had no idea what he was talking about, but I was like fascinated was the power of that kind of concept. Well, what would it be like for somebody to actually wake up and see the world in a different way? And I still get inspired by, as a practitioner, by both of those things at the same time. And so I just wanted to share that with you, because sometimes it seems like, well, this practice is just so simple and small and difficult, or, meaningless, in terms of a larger scale change that needs to happen in the world. But even in that small way in which we, hold somebody's hand, or we look into somebody's eyes, or we ask somebody, how are you doing? That expression of the possibility of ourselves as enlightenment, as realizing this true nature, my true nature, which is no different than the true nature of everything. That's there too. That's possible too. That's right there with us. And that's getting expressed also. That's getting communicated also. That's getting conveyed also. So I'll stop there. And like I said, I'm open to any questions you might have, if you didn't understand, or if you'd like to challenge me on anything I said, or feel free to do that, or make, like I said, make any of your own connections, or share any of your own insights. I'm happy to do that as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this episode of the Conscious Consulting Podcast. If you want to dive deeper into the field of conscious consulting and become a part of our community, just visit our website tcg-group.eu and subscribe to our newsletter so we can stay connected. We look forward to having you on board.